Join as we learn Chitas together, the Chumash for Friday, Parshas Vayigash, the sixth Torah reading of Parshas Vayigash, chapter 46, verse 28. In yesterday's Chitas, in yesterday's Chumash, we learned about Yaakov and his family traveling down to Egypt, and in total there were 70 people, including Yosef and his family, that were in Egypt. And today the Torah continues to tell us of how Yaakov prepares to come down to Egypt. Verse 28. Ves Yehuda shalach lefanav, and he sent Yehuda ahead of him, El Yosef, to Yosef, lahoiris lefanav, to make advanced preparations, Goshna, in the city of Goshen, vayavayu arza Canaan, and they arrived in the place of Goshen. Rashi, lahoiris lefanav, kitargumai, the simple interpretation is lefanes, to prepare, to make the place appropriate. Makim, to make a place where he would be, ulahoiris eich yisyashev ba, to decide of where he would settle. Lefanav, koidem shiyagia l'shama. What does that mean before him? In advance of Yaakov arriving there. Medrash Agada, the Medrash says, lahoiris lefanav, what does it mean that he went before him? Lesakin lebeis talmud shemisham teitzeira, to make sure that there was a yeshiva there, a place of learning, that from there would come the laws and the knowing and the knowledge of what to do and how to practice. From here we learn a very important lesson, as the Rebbe tells us, that when the Jewish people were going into exile, Yaakov saw they were leaving the land of Israel, going into the exile of Egypt, and he understood what would keep and sustain Jewish identity throughout their exile in Egypt is the study of Torah. Verse 29. Vayeser Yosef markafte, and then Yosef harnessed his own chariot, Vayal likras Yisrael, and he went to greet his father Yisrael, Aviv, his father Yisrael. Goshna, in the city of Goshen. Vayera Elav, and he appeared himself, he presented himself to his father. Vayipal al tzavarav, and he embraced him and fell on his neck, embraced him around his neck. Vayevk, and he cried al tzavarav oid, and wept on his neck for a long while. Rashi, Vayeser Yosef markafte, because of his love that he had for his father and respect, he didn't tell his servants to do it. But hu atzmei oser sasusam lemerkava, he himself was the one that harnessed the horses, that he should be able to ride on them, lizdaris l'kavi daviv, to be able to show that he was anxious and quickly to get there, to be able to show the respect to his father. Vayera elav, Yosef nira aviv, Yosef appeared to his father. Vayevkat tzavarav, what does it mean that he cried on his neck more? Loshin harbis b'chia, a lot of crying. V'chein, like we find this in other places. Ki liyasim el ish oid, loshin ribuyu, the word oid doesn't mean stop, but it means more. For example, in other places, Eini samalav alilas neisafes, al michadav, afkan here, b'vayisav b'pchi yeser al ragel. The same way we find in other verses, for example, where he talks about in Job, where no other libels God placed on him. So too over here, when we talk about that Yosef cried on his father's neck even more than usual. If you look, Rashi adds over here, if you look detailed in the verse, you'll find something very interesting, that Yosef is the one that cries on his father's neck. However, you don't find that Yaakov fell on Yosef's neck, or don't say that he kissed him as well. Amru Rabbi Seinu, our rabbis tell us what's the reason why Yaakov did not. Shahaya Keira es Shema, because at the time he was reading the Shema. There are many different commentaries of why Yaakov was specifically saying the Shema at the time when his father was coming to, when his son was coming to greet him. And over here, Yaakov was also teaching us the very fact that though he sees his son and he hasn't seen him for such a long time, the concept of the Shema was saying that the pain that he had because of his and not seeing his son, and the greatness that he sees his son today, is all because of thanks to God, and it was all God's plan. And v'ahavta, and he loves God unconditionally, regardless of the torment time that he went through. And therefore, specifically at this time, while Yosef was hugging him, was he saying the Shema, recognizing that everything that happens in life was from God. Verse 30. Vayomer Yisrael, and Yisrael said, El Yosef to Yosef El Musa. Now I can die, Hapam, and at this moment, Achrei Ra'isi, after now I haven't seen your face, now seeing your face, that you're still alive. What does it mean, now I can die? Pshutei. The simple interpretation of the verse is Ketarkumei, like the Targum says, now that I see you, I can die. The Medrash explains, Savra Yisi, I've thought that Yaakov was actually saying here, that I would have two deaths. One, Ba'ilam is in this world like everybody else, and also in the second world, in the world to come, because the divine presence left me. And I was saying, and that God, that this was caused because of your passing, because you passed and I didn't see you and I was sent to Shechem. But Achshav, now that I see, that you're still alive, I know I only die once in this world, but not in the world to come. Because until now I thought it was because of you that I would lose my portion in the world to come as well. Verse 31. Yosef says to his brothers, and to his father's home, let me go and tell Pharaoh that my father and my brothers from the land of Canaan have come to me. Verse 31, Rashi, and also I will tell him, as he goes on into the next verse, and he tells him, I'm going to tell him that my brothers and my father came from the land of Canaan, as well as I will tell him about who you are, that you are people that are shepherds that always owned livestock, and that's what your position is, as we're going to see in verse 32. V'hanoshim, and these men, royei tzoyin, are shepherds, ki anshe mikne hoyu, because they've always been owned livestock. V'tzoyinu b'vikaram, and their livestock and their sheep and their cattle, v'chol asher lahem, and everything they have and all their possessions they brought with them. Verse 33. And it will be when Pharaoh calls you, and it will summon you and ask you. And it will say, what is your occupation? Verse 34. And you will respond, your servants of livestock, dealers, minurenu, from our youth, until now. Gamanachnu, both we have been shepherds, gamavisenu, also our forefathers. This way you'll be able to settle in the land of Goshen. Because shepherds are abhorred to the Egyptians. Rashi, verse 34, this way you'll be able to settle in the land of Goshen. Because that is a land which is good for you. Shu eretz mira, it has a place which is good pasture for the sheep. So when you'll tell Pharaoh that you guys don't know about any other type of occupation, they'll therefore keep you there in a distance and allow you to stay in the place of Goshen. The reason why they consider why was it abhorrent for people that are shepherds? Because they consider sheep and livestock as their God. And therefore those who shepherd the sheep were considered disgusting and abhorrent in their eyes. Chapter 47, verse 1. Yosef came and told Pharaoh, and he said, my father, my brother, and their sheep and their livestock, and everything that they own, came from the land of Canaan, and they settled in the land of Goshen. Verse 2. And he selected from amongst his brothers, he took with him, 5 men, and he presented them in front of Pharaoh. Verse 2, Rashi, from the ones that weren't so strong, the weak ones. And they didn't seem strong, because if they would see strong, if Pharaoh would see that their brothers are very strong, he'll make them into the people for his war. Verse 2, and he selected from amongst his brothers 5 men, and he presented them in front of Pharaoh, introduced them to Pharaoh. Rashi, umiktsei echav, min hapchusim shebem legvura. He selected from his brothers the ones that were not as strong. She'inidim geboidim, they didn't seem strong. She'im yireisam kiboidim, because the Pharaoh would see that they are strong men. He was concerned. Yasai saman shalochamte, he'll take them and make them for people for his war. And who are the ones that he presented? Who are these weaklings, if you want to call them, not the strong ones? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, and Binyamin. How do we know that they weren't strong? That's because these are the ones that Moshe did not repeat their name when he blessed them. The people that were the strong ones, Kafal, Moshe repeated their name. For example, he says, "V'zeisli Yehuda," and then he continues and says, "Vayemer Shema Hashem Kel Yehuda." Ulegad Amar, Baruch Marchus Gad. Naftali Amar, Naftali. Uledan Amar, Dan. V'chein LeZvulun, and so for Zvulun. V'chein Lasher, and also by Yasher. Zeh Lashim Bereshis Rabbah. This is what the Bereshis Rabbah says. She Agoda Eretz Yisrael, which the Bereshis Rabbah is the Agoda, is the Midrashic interpretation that was learned in the land of Israel. Avol b'Gemara Bavlis, however, in the Babylonian Talmud, Shalanu Mitzinu, we find something a little different. Those that Moshe repeated their names, they were in fact, hey Machaloshim, they were the weak ones. And that's why Moshe had to repeat their names, because they were weak. And who is that? And those are the ones, and he had to bring to Paro. However, the only one which he repeated that was not weak was Yehuda. However, by Yehuda, he did not repeat his name because he was weak. Elatam Yeshbadavar, there was another reason why Moshe repeated his name. Kedeisa beBabakama, as it's explained in the tractate of Babakama, beBraisa, the Sefri, Shaninuba, beParzeisabrachi, Kemegamara Shalanu. And therefore, those that their names that were doubled, they were the weak ones, as we've discussed in the Babylonian Talmud, and as it's explained in the Parsha of Zeisabracha. So you have here a difference between the way it's learned in the Babylonian Talmud versus the Medrash Rabbah, which the weak ones, whether were they the ones that their names were not repeated or their names that were actually repeated. Verse 3, Vayemer Pari Alechav, and Pharaoh said to the brothers, Ma Ma'aseichem, what is your occupation? Vayemru al Pari, and they told Pharaoh, Ro Yitzein Avodecha, your servants are shepherds, Gam Anachnu, so both we are, Gam Aviseinu, and so are our forefathers. Verse 4, Vayemru al Pari, and they told Pari, Logur ba'aretz banu, we've come here to sojourn in the land. Ki ein mira latzein al vadecha, because there is no pasture, there is no grazing for our sheep that your servants have. Ki chavi derav beretz Canaan, because the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. The avaata, so now, yeshvu navadecha, please allow your servants be'eretz Goshen to settle in the land of Goshen. Verse 5. Vayemer Pari al Yosef, and Pharaoh said to Yosef, Lamer, saying, Avicha v'achecho boi elecha, now that your father and your brothers have come to you. Verse 6, Eretz Mitzrayim ufanecha, you have the land of Egypt is at your disposal. B'meitav ha'oretz hushav es avicha v'esachecha, settle your father and your brothers in the choicest part of the land. The best part of the land give them. V'im yadaita, Yeshiva beretz Goshen, and therefore they'll settle in the land of Goshen. The im yadaita, but if you know, the yesh b'manchechal, you have people that are capable, that they are capable shepherds, but who are capable for war. The samtem anchechayil, you must appoint them as stewards. The meaning you have capable shepherds, then make them as stewards, people in charge of al asher li, on the livestock that I own as well. Anshe Chayil, what does this mean? Anshe Chayil. Generally, the word Chayil can sometimes come from the word war or army. Over here, that we know that he presented those that were not fit for the army. So, what does Anshe Chayil mean here? So, Biki and Bumnasan Lirasain. Rashi explains it does not mean strong people, but on the contrary, over here it means people who are very well versed and are very well trained and capable in their work as being shepherds. Al Asher Li, meaning to be in charge, al tzayin shali, on my sheep. Verse 7. Yosef brought his father Jacob, Yaakov, and he placed them before Pharaoh. Yaakov and Yaakov blessed Pharaoh. Verse 7. What did he bless him? What does it mean that he blessed them? Did he literally bless them? So the blessing here, Rashi tells us, She'ilas Shalim. He asked him how he's doing. He inquired, meaning respectfully saying how he's doing. So too as the people that every so often come before a king, they give their opening statement, so to speak, that they greetings that they give to the king, not necessarily literally that he blessed him. Vayomer Pari el Yaakov, and Paro says to Yaakov, Kama yemei shnei chayecha, how old are you? How many years are there in your life? Vayomer Yaakov el Pari, and Yaakov says to Pari, Yemei shnei megurai, the years of my life, the years of my sojourning have been shloishim u'mas shana, 130 years. Ma'at v'ra'im, they were few but difficult. Yemei shnei chaya were the years of my life. But I've not yet equaled the happiness of the years of my forefathers' lifetime, b'mei b'gureim, in their days of sojourning. Rashi 9. What's he telling him here? Shnei migurai, meaning Yemei Gerusi, the days that I've sojourned in a strange place. Kol yamaya yisi ger ba'aretz. My whole life I was like a stranger in a foreign land because I worked really hard. Well, I did not reach, meaning b'teva. Doesn't mean that he had less years than his previous parents, but in years that he was able to enjoy was less than his father. One of the interesting things here you find, why does Pharaoh ask him his age? And the Medrash explains over here is because when he brought him before Pharaoh was considered small, so there was a little archway that would force every person to bend and bow before Pharaoh. And when Yaakov came, the archway extended itself. The last time the archway extended itself was when Avram came to Pharaoh, and there was a legend in Egypt that there was this great man who came, and the archway extended because of him. So when Yaakov came and the same thing happened, he asked him how old he is, because this same legend that happened in the past, is it the same person or is this somebody else? Verse 10, Vayivarech Yaakov es Pari, Vayetzim elifnei Pari. And Yaakov blessed Pharaoh, and he left before Pharaoh's presence. Vayivarech Yaakov, what did he actually bless him with? So this is an actual blessing. Before we said it was only a greeting. This is a blessing. Kederech kol haniftarim, like all the people that leave before respectable people. They bless them and then they take permission, they take leave before them. What was the blessing that Yaakov gave Pharaoh? What blessing did he give him? That when he goes to the Nile River, it should rise towards him. Because Egypt does not get any rain. The way they watered all the different fields and everything else was that the Nile River would come up over its banks, and that's the way the water would then run into different canals, umashka, and it would then give water to all the different fields. However, from the blessing of Yaakov and onward, Pharaoh would come to the Nile River whenever he wished. And the Nile River would rise, umashka aretz, and then give water to the entire surroundings and fill the banks and fill the rivers and canals, and that's the way the entire Egypt had water. This concludes the Torah reading for Friday, the 6th Torah reading of Parshas Vayigash.